think we can make some predictions using the insects. You know, we can go out there. It's very inexpensive for me to go out there, and you know, or my student to go out there and stand, you know, on a beach and collect ants, or to go with a sweep net. You know, your classic entomologist walking around with a big net. Yeah, that's us. You know, sweep net, collecting these insects, and then we bring them back in the lab, and that's where the real work begins, where we have to sort everything and figure out what everything is and figure out where they are, you know, in the food web. But and we don't have to, you know, get a really big boat, or although having a boat is helpful, getting to the different marshes, areas of the marsh. Yeah, so we do actually go out in a boat, but we're cooperating with people who, so we put a bunch of people, you know, who have different objectives together, and we all get in the same boat and do it. So. Yeah, I mean, I've said it's inexpensive, but it still takes money to do it. I mean, we have to drive to the coast, and sometimes our work is very detailed, even though, you know, we don't require a really expensive piece of equipment for sampling, or, so if we can get ourselves there and get our samples, you know, it's relatively inexpensive. We have to stay overnight sometimes when we're like coming up, we have a 4-day sampling trip, because it just optimizes what we're doing, and it actually, you know, it's cheaper than keeping to driving back and forth. So it's relatively inexpensive, but yeah, we fortunately have some funding from the National Science Foundation for the project I described, where there's 10 researchers that are all studying different parts of this food web and the ecosystem, and trying to determine individually and then as a group together what the effect of these stressors are that I talked about, the oil, the dispersants, and the cleanup activities. That has funding from the National Science Foundation, but the interesting thing is we got the grant, and we only have funding to actually gather the samples. We have another grant in to another agency to actually process some of those samples, and it's sometimes the processing of my samples can be, you know, expensive, because we have to sort, you know, cut open plants. You know, the ants in the marshes actually live in the plants, which is why they can survive an inundation. And so, you know, they have to go through and take out everything out of the, you know, separated from the plant material, and then cut open the plants and see what's inside the plants. So very time consuming. The other part of my project actually has no funding, and at this point, right now as we speak, well, I have funding for the portion of it that's in Louisiana, but I cannot drive out of state. So the part in Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas, my student and I cannot work on that part of the project right now. We have preliminary data, and we are in the process right now. I'm, you know, tried in a couple different ways to get some funding. So we are. It's normal, except for this is an abnormal thing, and usually it's, you know, you try a couple different times and then you get some funding, and it's very difficult. So.
And any problems gaining access to the areas, at least in Louisiana, that you'd like to study?
In Louisiana, in the past we did have problems. I will, in a reserved way, say it's getting a little bit better since the patrolling and the cleanup efforts have been decreased. It's gotten a little bit easier. We were blocked from a couple different sites in South Louisiana. Early on, it was Grand Isle. Grand Isle's been opened up, so we were able to get in there. Actually, my student went down to Grand Isle, I think, 4 times before he was actually able to get access, and at least, actually, I think it was more than 4 times, but and so he was able to gain access to Grand Isle, and then we've had trouble getting into Port Fourchon, even though in the past we've been able to work there, but the organization that owns most of the marsh area there has been unwilling to grant access to independent researchers. So yeah, there's still some challenges. I don't think that I could get into Port Fourchon if I drove down there right now. So.
And at one point you had some trouble, a 3-year moratorium on publication. My
understanding is the people who are contracted with the consulting companies that BP is using to generate data to support their side of the litigation sign an agreement. And when I say people, I mean my fellow scientists. They sign an agreement that has a secrecy clause that doesn't allow them to discuss their research, present their research, or publish their research for a minimum of 3 years. So that's one side of the litigation, the scientists that are developing, gathering data for that side of litigation. Then there's the other side of litigation, which is what we call the NERDA. The scientists refer to it as the NERDA process, but it's the Natural Resource Damage Assessment process. And that's basically the government side of this pending litigation to determine the damages to the coastal environment, to the organisms, and then eventually to the people of Louisiana. And that process requires a confidentiality agreement for acts that would, if I signed it, we'd have unfettered access and funding in order to do our work. And that confidentiality agreement lacks an end in the agreement, and the scientists would be released to discuss or publish their data when the Department of Justice tells them that they are able to do so. People working for the Natural Resources Damage Assessment Project are saying, we know that the public is very curious about these data, and we want the data to be out there, but they will not promise that it could happen. And as a university researcher, especially at LSU, I work for the public. I'm a public servant. I feel really, really strongly about that. I feel like the people have a right to know. If they want to know what I'm doing, we're an open book. And also the process of giving people, scientists, money to do research to support one side of litigation is really not at the heart of what we do. We apply for grants, and they get peer reviewed, and we then get funded, and then we do the research, and we test hypotheses. And I'm testing hypotheses. I'm not going to tell you right now what side, of whatever potential litigation that my data will support. I cannot tell you that right now. Of course, we make predictions on which parts of what we study might be most sensitive if they're affected, but that's why we test the hypotheses. And that's the exciting part of the science, is we don't know what's going to come out. We know we're going to get data. And then I go to publish, it gets peer reviewed again, and it's stringent, the review. If I don't analyze my data correctly, or if I make an assumption, my colleagues are going to catch it. And so it's the second process is peer reviewed. And so it's a purely objective process. And so that's really what we do.